Welcome to US1 Snapshots, where we do little overviews of big themes in American history. Today, the emerging nation. Our focus points for today. America has always claimed to value natural rights and the liberty to shape your own life. American government was formed with these values in mind. Important documents that explain these values shaped American politics. Many people in America, however, were not granted these rights. The Americas were colonized by European settlers in the 16th and 17th centuries, or the 1500s to the 1600s. A colony is a country or area under the control of a foreign power. In this case, European colonizers had the goals of finding gold, spreading settlements to create markets for trade, and to spread Christianity. Here we can see the multiple European monarchies, or rule by a royal king, competing to enrich and expand their rule in the New World. The green, much of Latin America colonized by Spain; the purple, Portugal, which would become Brazil; the blue was French. Eventually, most of it was the Louisiana Purchase, but French Canada still remains today; and the original 13 colonies of England in red, of which New Jersey was part. One thing that was distinct about the Spanish colonies was that they were controlled by the Spanish monarchy, which enjoyed solid power from the 1500s all the way through the 20th century. You can see a little bit of the Spanish monarchy's cultural power in various symbols in La Liga, like the seal of FC Barcelona or Real Madrid, both of which might have a crown on top or have the royal stripes. Many of the La Liga teams pledged their loyalty to the crown through these symbols. There are other soccer teams in Europe that were actually formed with the anti-royalty in mind. And some of those teams actually form their local rivalries around loyalty to the king or disloyalty to the king. But in England, the government was much more unstable. English colonies actually enjoyed a lot of relative freedom and self-government during their early decades because of the ongoing civil conflict in the 1600s going on in England. Here we can see a picture of King Charles I being executed during the English Civil War in 1649. The English crown went back and forth between Protestant and Catholic, and actually the crown had no power at all during the interregnum period when the Parliament ruled. Due to this ongoing instability, there was very little restriction going on in the American colonies. This would all change in the 1760s. England fought on behalf of their interests in the colonies in the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763. This was a war largely against the French, but both sides had their alliances with different Indian tribes. The results of the war were mainly that there was a huge expensive cost to England and a settlement between France and England about who controlled which areas in the New World. Here we can see what was called the Line of Proclamation, this red line that ran mostly along the Smoky and Allegheny Mountain Range in the Appalachians. And this divided the area of English settlement, although many settlers actually lived west of that line and were forced to come back. In addition, many settlers wanted to continue to push west into lands that were technically now by treaty belonging to Indians. Additionally, there was a colony allowed by treaty to the north of Quebec, where the French Canadians could practice Catholicism freely, and many colonists didn't like this very much, who were not really in love with the Catholic Church. Regardless, England decided to pass many taxes and restrictions on their colonies during the 1760s and 1770s to help pay for the cost of the war. We can see many of these restrictions in the form of the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, and the Intolerable Acts, all of which restricted colonial trade and favored English trade interests in the New World. So by 1775, the American Revolutionary War had started, and it continued on until 1783, when America won its independence. This war began largely because of taxes and restrictions, but also because of incidents like the Boston Massacre, where fights with dock workers and British soldiers over jobs at the dock eventually turned violent. And although this was blown up as a huge reason for colonists to go to war and be outraged, British soldiers were ultimately found to be defending themselves by an American judicial system. America did, however, declare its independence from England July 4th, 1776. One of the things we want to focus on is these foundational ideas of America. The American Revolution was justified by an idea called social contract theory. This idea states that you have the right to speak truth to power and shape your own life when it comes to your government. If your government does not protect your natural rights, you have the right to break this contract and form a new government. So essentially, you as the people agree to give up some of your freedom by obeying the law. And in exchange, you expect the law to then protect your rights. When you feel like this is not happening, you have the right to revolt and form a new government. The road to the United States Constitution was not exactly smooth. After the American Revolutionary War, the country struggled for nearly a decade until 1789, when the U.S. Constitution was finally put in place or ratified. The first kind of government in the American colonies after independence was the Articles of Confederation. This was a loose agreement between the state governments to have some kind of central authority. But as we can see in the political cartoon here, it had no national court system, no power to enforce any treaties, no power to raise an army, no power to collect taxes, could also not coin money or create a standard currency. Fighting between the states led the Articles of Confederation to collapse. But by 1787, the United States Constitution was adopted. It required some major guarantees, however, and these form some of the foundational ideas of America. One of the first guarantees, which is found in the Articles, Article 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution, is a system of separation of powers and checks and balances. The Constitution divides up the powers of government into a legislative branch, which makes the law, an executive branch that enforces the law, and a judicial branch that will interpret and review the law to decide what its limits are. These were all designed in the hopes to prevent tyranny, or a state of government where you are punished at the judgment of whomever is in power. So the US government is designed to be inefficient. It is designed to spread power out. You can see that there are several checks on each branch of government. For example, President Trump has appointed dozens and dozens of judges to the judicial system in order to prefer his ideology. He also can veto acts of Congress. But the legislative branch can control the budget of the president, and they have already done so. They have amended his budget several times. The courts can actually put holds on his orders, like they did with his travel orders and his travel bans. And the Congress can actually bring the president to trial for crimes, like they did already with the impeachment hearing. So these formal separation of powers exist because our government is intended to never let one source get too powerful, and that is in the hopes of preventing tyranny. You can find this idea more clearly articulated in the Federalist Papers, where James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay clearly explain how creating a system like this of spreading out power is the best way to prevent any one faction or any one individual from gaining that monarchy kind of power where they can punish people without any kind of checks. However, one of the most difficult aspects of human history is that despite these values, most of the protection of rights in the early years of the United States was afforded to only one category: white male property owners. The equal application of these rights and values has been at the core of the debate about the meaning of America ever since. So in closing, Do you believe that people should have the natural right to speak truth to power and shape their own lives? Why have these ideals been hard to achieve in America? What are your thoughts?